September 2, 1897, The Spokesman Review, Spokane, Washington. In the Luetgert Trial, 2 witnesses who believed the defendant was committing crime while in the factory. Chicago, September 1. 2 witnesses were on the stand in the Luetgert trial today, and when the court adjourned, the testimony of one of them was not completed and will be resumed tomorrow. The first witness was Frank Bjalk, the watchman of the factory, who was on the stand yesterday giving his direct evidence, and today he was turned over to the defense for cross-examination. His testimony was in the main unshaken, although the defense drew from him the fact that it was by no means an unusual thing for Luetgert to be around the factory at all hours of the night. He said in his direct examination that he thought Luetgert was acting in a suspicious manner on the night of the alleged murder, and today said that he was in a position from which he could have seen everything Luetgert did at the vat on the night the murder is said to have taken place, but did not look at him. The other witness was Frank Adorfsky, an employee of the factory who placed the caustic potash in the vat on the order of Luetgert. He had been working around the vats for a long time, but that night was the first time that he had ever seen any caustic potash in the factory. He testified to finding in the morning in the vat into which he had put the potash on the night previous a mass of slimy brown matter in which he found pieces of bone and pieces of a substance which he took to be flesh. Luetgert told him to take the stuff away and throw it around the yard, but instead of doing this, he dumped it all in one place, and afterwards showed the police where he had put it. When court adjourned for the day, Adorfsky was still on the stand, and his testimony will be concluded tomorrow. September 14, 1897, Baltimore American, Baltimore, Maryland. A Luetgert juror is taken sick. A postponement of the trial made necessary. The witnesses examined. Chicago, September 13. Puffing at a cigar and smiling in a manner which betokened contentment, Adolph L. Luetgert this morning appeared before Judge Tuttle to begin the 4th week of his trial for alleged wife murder. The court proceedings began with the cross-examination of Professor George V. Bailey, and it was not long before Attorney Vincent and the professor were involved in a dispute over the use of a technical term which called for the interference of the court. A small piece of bone was handed to the witness, and he was asked to name it. "This is a sesamoid," promptly asserted the professor. "Has it ever been boiled?" queried Attorney Vincent. "It has." "Might not alkali water poured on a bone produce the same effect?" "It might in time. It would cause scaling and a softness after a long time." Attorney Vincent cross-questioned Professor Bailey sharply on the point of sesamoids and wanted to know if the witness could tell the difference between a sesamoid bone of a human being and a similar bone upon an animal. The question seemed to worry the witness, who was warm and nervous. He admitted that a bruise or injury might produce a sesamoid and said that he had seen sesamoid bones on the toes of animals. The examination of Professor Bailey continued until 11:30 o'clock. The professor startled Attorney Vincent by the assertion that he had discovered 6 sesamoid bones in a single hand while a student in the University of Paris. Attorney Vincent declared that surgical history contained no reference to more than 2 sesamoids being found upon a hand or foot. Professor Bailey replied that he knew that fact and kept his discovery secret because he was writing a book on the subject. The witness refused to make a statement as to the probable original location of sesamoid bones handed him until he had an opportunity to examine them. He was granted further time. At 11:30 Juror John E. Fowler was taken suddenly ill and court adjourned until 1 p.m. Dr. McNamara, who examined Juror Fowler, stated that the latter was suffering from chills and fever. The physician believed he could break the fever in a couple of days without Juror Fowler being withdrawn from active duty. As a result, Judge Tuttle adjourned court this morning until 9:30 Wednesday. A sensation was created this morning in the courtroom by the rumor that Doctors Allport and Rutherford, witnesses for the defense, were heard to remark while examining the bones that they were human. The medical men deny this, however, and say they never made the remark. Arnold Luetgert, with the famous center vat and his father's 4 Great Dane dogs, is planning to tour the country at the conclusion of the sausage maker's trial. The history of the wooden tank, young Luetgert says, he will recite to the crowds he expects to attract. Dogs will be taken as a sort of sideshow. Since Adolf L. Luetgert's arrest, the Great Danes have guarded the factory and the family home against intruders, one of them lying on the front porch of the residence and 2 others patrolling the factory. Besides the vat and dogs, Arnold Luetgert is preparing to take many other relics brought into prominence by the trial of his father for alleged wife murder. The doors which covered the vat during the alleged disintegration of Mrs. Luetgert's body, the shovel found beside the vat, some of the caustic potash, and a number of views of the interior and exterior of the factory will be exhibited. Arnold Luetgert expects the family name and his connection with the famous case will attract crowds to his exhibit. September 29, 1897. The Daily Star, Fredericksburg, Virginia. The Luetgert Trial. The battle between experts in Chicago's celebrated case. Doctors' gruesome testimony. Explains the destruction of human bodies by potash in order to combat the prosecution theory. Another witness who saw Mrs. Luetgert. Chicago, September 29. The battle between the experts has begun, and from now on, there will be denials thrown at the evidence of the medical men and chemists who testified for the state in the Luetgert case. The defense put its first witness in the expert line on the stand yesterday, and he will be followed by a long string of others. Yesterday's witness was Dr. B. L. Rice, who boiled 2 bodies in caustic potash in the vat in Luetgert's sausage factory and obtained results different from those who performed the same experiment in behalf of the state. Another witness of the day was Armandale Updike, a peddler who testified that long after the murder is said to have been committed, he saw Mrs. Luetgert in the neighborhood of Janesville, Wisconsin. He said there was no chance of his being mistaken, and he identified a photograph of her in the most positive manner. 2 girls were placed upon the stand to impeach the testimony of Emma Schimpke, who said that she saw Luetgert and his wife enter the factory on the night in which the murder is said to have been committed. There is a strong probability that Mary Slemmering will be called upon to answer a charge of perjury. Dr. Rice told of experiments he had made in disintegrating human bodies with a 10% solution of caustic soda or potash. Dr. Rice first experimented in the middle vat, the one the body of Mrs. Luetgert is alleged to have been placed in. He said that the first experiment was made with the body of a woman 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing 90 pounds. The crude potash was emptied into the vat in the manner Luetgert is alleged to have placed the potash in the same receptacle on May 1, and the steam was turned on. In a few minutes, the body was put into the vat, the steam turned on, and the vat covered with gunny sacks. The boiling process was continued for several hours, with the result that very little of the flesh was left. The physician described the color of the liquid in the vat, which resembled, he said, vinegar. On the surface of this liquid was a fatty substance, the 20th part of an inch deep. The expert said that the teeth of the subject, extending from the gums, were not injured, but the roots of these teeth, which had been covered with flesh, were crumbled and, in some instances, brittle. The skull, femurs, and the large bones of the arms still remained intact, or nearly so. The hair almost entirely disappeared. Into the vat at the beginning of the experiment was thrown 2 gold finger rings. It was found that the solution had not affected the rings. Dr. Rice also testified that he had experimented with hairpins and a corset, the latter from Mrs. Luetgert's wardrobe. Different kinds of hairpins were used. Those which were japanned came out of the test minus the japan. Bone, celluloid, and rubber hairpins were tested, and it was found that they were utterly destroyed by the solution. A hard rubber button was placed in the liquid, but it was not destroyed. The second experiment, with the body of a man, was much the same, with the exception that the vat was left uncovered. The process did not require much longer, despite this fact. The effect of Dr. Rice's testimony, which in fact bore out to a considerable degree the claims of the prosecution, was to establish one important point that the defense has kept in view from the beginning. Frank Adorfsky and Frank Bjalk testified that the floor of the basement near the middle vat was covered with grease that had flowed from the vat. Dr. Rice testified that the residue from both of the bodies boiled in the vat was very little. The fat did not amount to over a 20th part of an inch, the physician said. Ex-Judge Vincent declared the statement substantiated the story of the defense that Luetgert was making soap in the vat and that the grease in the soap boiled over.